still not doing it right. The Lord is well able to expedite you on the road to union if that's what you want. So this is October 17, 1910. Because the value of everything is the value of the love and the union. So while he was saying this, I felt I was outside of myself together with blessed Jesus. And again I said to him, my sweet love, tell me, where is this soul? Okay. Who is she talking about? The priest who has died. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, in purgatory. Now, in these writings, Jesus says that 9 out of 10 people who die go to purgatory. Okay. In purgatory. Oh, if you saw in what light he is swimming, you would be amazed. So obviously he's very high up. He's not down in the depths of suffering. Okay. And Luisa said, you say that he's in purgatory and that he swims in light? And Jesus said, yes. He finds himself swimming in light because he had kept this light in deposit. And in the act of dying, this light has invested him and will never leave him. And Luisa said, I understood that this light were the good works done with purity of intention. So everything is measured on the other side. Yes. And many times Jesus repeats this in these writings, that every single thing we do or don't do is all numbered. Everything, absolutely everything. I've met people who even have had a vision from the Lord of the garment they will have for the wedding banquet in heaven. And in one particular case, the person said there were a lot of diamonds on it. And there were other precious stones as well. But she just noticed there was a lot of diamonds on it. And she'd been through a very, very, very difficult time. And she said, where do the diamonds come from? And he said, they're all your tears that you have wept in trying to deal with this crisis. It's very interesting. So he was showing her something apropos of what she had just been through. And again, he's trying to say everything is registered in heaven, absolutely everything. So when Luisa comes to talk about some of the priests who actually have died, because I think she went through 6 or 7 priests in her time, she says that some of them actually, their divine acts were like stars sprinkling from them on their way to heaven. You know. So October the 24th, 1910, we're back to a very basic thing that you learned a lot about in volumes 1 and 2, and that is disturbance. Back there in volumes 1 and 2, Jesus gave a lot of attention to the fact that if we want to be in union with God and we want to be available to him, then we have to have this deep peace in the depths of our being. Luisa said, I was highly afflicted because of the privation of my lovable Jesus. And having received communion, I was lamenting because of his absence. And Jesus told me in my interior, so that's an interior locution, my daughter, sad things, very sad things are happening and will happen. Now that's her role as prophet, Amos 3:7. I was frightened, she said. So various days went by without Jesus, because he's chastising, isn't he? I just heard him repeat often, my good daughter, patience with my not coming. Later I'll tell you why. Now, he won't tell her ahead of time because she'll try and prevent him from doing what he needs to do. So I went on embittered, yes, but peaceful. Now, peaceful is the correct thing because God works in peace and Satan works in disturbance. Okay. When all of a sudden I had a dream that saddened me very much and also disturbed me. More so since, not seeing Jesus, I had no one to whom to turn in order to be surrounded by that aura of peace that Jesus alone possesses. Now, she's actually saying something terribly important here, and that is for us to persevere in the spiritual union with God in the divine will, it's actually necessary for us to gather so that we experience each other's peace and not just our own. And when you experience the peace of the group, which you have done in our various gatherings, the peace was obvious, wasn't it? It builds you up and it sends you home with much more courage to fight for your own peace. So Luisa says here that there was nobody with that aura of peace that only Jesus possesses. And that aura of peace is Philippians 4:7, the peace that passes all understanding and guards our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. Oh, she said, how a disturbed soul is to be pitied. Disturbance is an infernal air that one breathes, and this air of hell casts out the celestial air of peace. This is why Jesus told us in volumes 1 to 2 to fight disturbance. And this pestilential disturbance takes the place of God in the soul, because God only reigns in peace. Fuming with this infernal air in the soul, disturbance masters her so much that with its infernal blow it makes even the holiest, the purest things appear as ugly and even dangerous. Now, people in the world who don't have the peace of God in them, and they are not letting the grace of God guide them, lose all sense of religion and the meaning of doctrine or anything, or even the meaning of life. It's really incredible, because I've had people say to me within the last 6 months that life meant nothing to them. Nothing. So doing away with the life would mean nothing as well. They're literally on the edge of the abyss. And this is Ireland, as you know, I don't travel. So this pestilential disturbance puts everything in disorder, and the soul, tired of this disorder, is soaked with the stink of this air of hell. She's annoyed by everything, and she feels boredom even with God himself. Isn't that interesting? Now, you don't have to travel far to find people who are bored at Mass, do you? No, they have no sense of the presence. They've no sense of what's going on. They've no sense of connection with what's going on. They've no sense of opening themselves up to God. They've no sense of privilege. It's very frightening. I find it so frightening. I now go up to the top of the church so I'll only see the altar. Luisa said, I did feel this air of hell, not inside me, but around me. Now that's extremely important, because it's not inside her. If it's inside her, she's in dire trouble. It was around her, so she felt the demons around her. And yet it did so much harm to me that I no longer cared that Jesus was not coming. Isn't that interesting? Even more, it seemed to me that I didn't even want him. It's true that the thing was very serious, not a bagatelle. We would say not a trifle. Okay. It was that I had been assured that I was not in a good state. Therefore, the sufferings, the visits of Jesus were not the will of God. You see all the wrong stuff that she's been told. And I was supposed to stop it once and for all. So I dare say she got a visit from a different priest. Okay. I'm not saying everything about it, naturally, because she has to be very careful what she writes on paper. Because I don't think it's necessary. I wrote this only to obey. Then, the following night, Luisa said, I saw water pouring down from heaven like a deluge, such as to cause great damage and bury even entire towns. So she's looking at something that reminds her of the flood. And the impression from that dream was that I didn't want to see anything. In the meantime, a dove hovering over me told me the moving of the leaves of the plants, the murmuring of the waters, the light that invades the earth, the motion of all nature, everything comes from the finger of God. Knock out the S. The finger of God is a very important expression. You'll find it in Luke 11:20. Luke 11:20. You'll find it in Exodus 8:19. and in Exodus 31:18. Now, in the book of Exodus, you have Moses working his miracles in Egypt, and the Pharaoh opposing his miracles with his magicians and sorcerers and others with the occult. And he came to a certain point where the very magicians went to Pharaoh and said, "Listen, stop. This is the finger of God." Now, that's the sign. It's the right hand, always the right hand, because the right hand always represented the power of God. Because you can't picture God, so they pictured his right hand, and the fingers down and the thumb, and just this one up. That represented the authority of God. Now, if I give you that sign, I've given you the image of Jesus writing in the dust in John chapter 8. It was the finger of God's right hand writing on the consciences of the men who had accused the woman. That's actually what he was doing. He was exposing their consciences. Now, in Luke 11, Jesus is telling his opponents that his exorcisms and his miracles are the proof that God is present, the finger of God's right hand. Okay. So, imagine if your state alone should not come from the finger of God. So, when the confessor came, I told him everything about my state, and he told me that it had been the devil in order to disturb me. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. I remained a little bit more peaceful, but like someone who had suffered a grave illness. In other words, you've really been through it. So, October the 29th. Now, notice even at her stage, the devil doesn't give up. I mean, if he was prepared to attack Christ, he'll attack anybody. So she has a lesson to learn, and it's given to her in October the 29th, 1910. 3 weapons to fight disturbance. This is very important. And before we even read it, I want to give you 2 Peter 1:2. 2 Peter 1:2. I want to give you 2 Thessalonians 3:16. I want to give you Hebrews 13:20 and Colossians 3:15. Now there's lots more, but that's enough.
Sorry, Colossians
3:15. As I was in my usual state, Luisa said, it seemed that Jesus made himself seen for a little. And I said to him, "Life of my life, my dear Jesus, during these past days I have been disturbed, and you, who have been so jealous of my peace." John 14:27, "My own peace I give you, not the peace the world offers." John 14:27. "You've been so jealous of my peace, have not had a single word from me in these past days to give me that peace which you also want." And he said, my daughter, I was scourging and destroying cities and burying human lives. This is why I haven't come. I've been rather busy. On this day of respite, he said, for then I will take up the scourge in my hand once again. Immediately I have come to see you. You must know that if I did not reward the things done with purity of intention, look at the emphasis again. The upright works, upright means righteous or holy. They're done properly with the right intentions. And everything that is done for love of me. You see, you'll notice that very often we get a clump of messages and they're all around the same thing. He said, I would fail in justice, and all my other attributes would remain obscured. Now, my book says I would fail a duty of justice, which is very awkward. I would fail in justice is what we would say. Therefore, these are the 3 most powerful weapons to destroy this poisonous and infernal slobber of disturbance. Now, notice the slobber. Now, you've already been given them, but just in case you haven't had time to analyse the text. Number 1, purity of intention. Purity of intention. Number 2, done for love of him. Number 2, And number 3, righteous or holy works. Righteous or holy. You see, that's what I mean by points. They're succinct and to the point.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no floweriness on it. So, if it is necessary to, if the necessity to chastise should force me not to come for a few days, and this air of hell wants to invest you, put these 3 weapons against it: purity of intention, and he adds for her the work of the victim soul, that's your sacrifice and reparation, upright and good in itself, and sacrificing yourself for me, with the sole purpose of loving me, and you will defeat any disturbance and will cast it away to the deepest hell. Now notice where disturbance came from, and you've got to send the disturbance back to where it came from. Now that's actually incredibly important, because we belong to an age where you rationalise everything. You know, it's because so-and-so said this, or I got that phone call, or I got this letter, or I was at this meeting, or blah, 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 and we analyse it like that. And instead of analysing, you'd look at the effect, which is disturbance, and get the disturbance back to hell. And if you get the disturbance back to hell, if there's a decision there that you have to take as a result of the meeting or whatever, it'll come much quicker. And it'll come with wisdom as well. Now, here we have another key. And with your indifference, you will turn the key so that it may no longer be able to get out and molest you. Okay. So the key, therefore, is you do everything for love of Jesus. You have the right intention, okay? And they're holy works. Now, in Luisa's case, it's her victim soul, sacrifices and so on. So November the 1st, 1910, we're talking about unity. Continuing in my usual state, blessed Jesus came for just a little, and he told me, my daughter, the supreme unity is when the soul reaches such closeness of union, my book says tightness. Is that okay? Yeah. Such closeness of union with my will as to consume any shadow of her own will. In other words, her own will is finally handed over. In such a way that it is no longer possible to discern which one is my will and which one is hers, because there's only one. Just as you can't discern which is the will of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, it's one will. Then my will becomes the life of this soul in such a way that whatever thing it may dispose, that's the divine will, may dispose over her, as well as over others, she's content with everything. Now, of course, if God's will is actually governing my life in all my actions and so on, there isn't a will opposing him. And because there's no will opposing him, there's complete peace. Now you have the peace that passes all understanding, and the disturbance cannot finally get in. Now, I know this is a bar that we're still aiming at. Is that okay? But if you know what it's like, you'll actually let it happen much more easily. Okay. So that means she's content with everything. Anything seems suitable for her: death, life, the cross, poverty, whatever. She looks at all of these as her own things, which serve to maintain her life. She reaches, you'd have to put a little word, to such an extent that not even chastisements frighten her anymore. Now that would help with Luisa, wouldn't it? But she's content with the divine will in everything. Now once we get past volume 20, that's Luisa. She's no longer worried about herself or chastisements or anything else. So much so that it seems to her that if I want something, she wants it too. And if she wants it, the Lord wants it. I do what she wants, and she does what I want. Now there's the testimony of Padre Pio as well, and indeed many other saints as well. So he said, this is the final breath of the consummation of your will in mine. And you can see it leads to total happiness, which I have asked you many times, and which obedience and love towards your neighbour have not conceded you. So much so that many times I have surrendered to you by not chastising, but you have not surrendered to me, to the point that I am forced to hide from you in order to be free when justice forces me, and men reach the point of provoking me to take up the scourge in my hand and chastise people. Now, we don't put the S at the end of people because it's a plural word. Obviously, in Italian, you need to pluralize it. If I had you with me, with my will, in the act of scourging, I would probably have fallen short and diminished the scourge. Because there's no greater power in heaven or on earth than a soul who is totally and completely consumed in my will. Isn't that incredible? Mm-hmm. Let me say that again. There is no greater power in heaven or on earth than a soul who is totally and completely consumed in my will. She reaches the point of debilitating me, and she disarms me as she pleases. This is the supreme unity. But then there's a low unity in which the soul is resigned, yes, but she doesn't look at my dispositions as her things, as her own life, nor does she delight in my will or dissolve hers in mine. And this one I look at, yes, but she does not reach the point of enamouring me, or I do not reach the point of going mad for her. I love the expression going mad for you, as I do for those with supreme unity. Okay, I read that a bit quickly. There's a low unity and a high unity. Okay. There's the low unity where a person is resigned to doing God's will, and they will do their acts, and they will do their exercises, and they will do everything and all the rest of it. But this very high thing of having surrendered everything to the divine will is not present. They might be aiming at it, but it's not actually present. And therefore, the prayers don't have the same effect as the one who has completely handed over the will, and the divine will alone reigns. So the divine will is actually doing all the prayers inside of you, and all the actions and all the movements and everything else. Okay, so there's low unity and high unity. Now I think it's up around volume 18. Not completely sure of the volume. It's up around there where the Lord tells us there's 4 different levels at which you can live the divine will. Now here we only have 2, and that's enough for the moment. Is that okay? The low and the high. But we would know this from everyday life as well. There's marriage and marriage, isn't there? We say some marriages are made in heaven.
Yeah.
We say some marriages are made on earth. And we say others are made in hell.
Yeah.
It's completely different types of union. Okay? And we just know this just from observation. Okay? There's a very lovely moment in the scriptures that you may or may not have noticed in the book of Genesis, where Rebecca was on her way to meet her future husband Isaac, and she was on her camel, and Isaac had wandered to the well where Hagar had seen the angel, and Isaac was looking for some kind of consolation from God. And when he looked up, he didn't see an angel from heaven. He saw this beautiful woman on the camel. She was in her cavalcade. And the Bible will tell you that she got down from the camel to go and meet him. But if you read it into Hebrew, it says she fell off the camel and fell at his feet. And that's the origin of falling in love. And it was love at first sight. And it's the first example in the Bible of really just love at first sight. Neither of them ever look back. It's fascinating. In other words, what they're trying to tell you is she got so excited she fell off the camel. Now, it's not difficult to fall off the camel, I think. But something like that you wouldn't pick up in a translation, because a translation loses an awful lot. So there are unions and unions. Okay, so the last piece of volume 9 is very short. November the 3rd, 1910. The soul is the paradise of Jesus on earth. This morning, blessed Jesus made himself seen in my interior in the act of cheering himself and of relieving himself of the great bitterness that human beings give him. And he said these simple words, "You are my paradise on earth, my comfort." Now, why would he say it? It's because she's the only one on earth living in the divine will. So she's the only soul where he feels completely comfortable. Now, there are lots of other good people and people trying to live in union with God and everything, but they're not in the divine will. And so it's a much different type of relationship. And so Jesus is saying to her, "You're my paradise on earth." Isn't that lovely? There's a famous lady whom you may not have heard of. Her name is Madeleine du Clercq. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
Foundress of a community of sisters. And her famous statement is that the surrendered soul has found paradise on earth. The surrendered soul is the one who has handed everything over. Now, this is long before divine will. So you can see that even from saints, now she would have been 19th century, I think, that the Lord has been preparing for divine will for an awful long time. Okay. So now we're going into volume 10. And volume 10 isn't very long. And so after that, then we have the peak of this revelation in volumes 11 and 12. Okay. So November the 9th, 1910. This is the first one in volume 10. And look, it's the bad effects of human works done with a human purpose. So we start off with the warning. If you only do it at the human level, forget about it. You're not talking about this high union with God. So finding myself in my usual state, Luisa said, I was commending the many needs of the church to my blessed Jesus. And Jesus told me, "My daughter, the holiest works done for a human purpose are like cracked pots." Now, why would he say cracked pots? Because everything was made of pottery in his day. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So 2 Corinthians 4:7 for the cracked pots. We're the cracked pots and the Lord manages to do something with us. We're like earthenware vessels, Paul says. Now, if one pours any liquor into them, little by little it flows out on the ground. And when they go to get those containers in time of need, they find them empty. This is why the children of my church have reduced themselves to such a state as they're in 1910. Because in their works, everything is done for a human purpose. The level is too low. It's not a divine level. So, in needs, in dangers, in affronts, they have found themselves to be empty of grace. And therefore, being debilitated, worn out, and almost blinded by the human spirit, they give themselves to excesses. Oh, how vigilant the leaders of the church should have been, so that I would not be made the laughing stock and almost the lid covering their wicked actions. Oh, my goodness. Why does Jesus say it would make him the laughing stock? Because he's the shepherd of the flock. And so if the sheep are sickly and scrawny and not well fed, the shepherd is blamed because he's supposed to be feeding them. And if the sheep are healthy and strong and vibrant, then they say it's a good shepherd because he's taking care of his sheep. Is that okay? When Mahatma Gandhi was asked at one stage, would he not think of becoming a Christian? He said, absolutely no. I love your Christ, he said. Well, I sure don't like his followers. He said, none of them are like him. And he's absolutely right. Yeah. In other words, Jesus becomes a laughing stock because of us. Now, in St. Paul's letter to the Romans, in chapter 2, at the very beginning of chapter 2, Paul tells the Jews that the Lord has been disgraced by their behaviours. Okay. And almost the lid covering their wicked actions, in other words, using God for their own benefit. It's true that there would be, watch this, it's true that there would be great scandal if they repented. In other words, that the sins would become known. But this would be a minor offence for me compared to the many sacrileges that they commit. So you can see that the exposure of the sins of the clergy and the hierarchy, while it is a terrible scandal throughout the world, it actually allows the pus out of the wound. Do you know what I mean? And something can be done. Alas, it's too hard for me to tolerate them, he said. Pray, pray, my daughter, because many sad things are about to come out of the children of the church. Now, these sad things are the scandals. Now, it's 1910. The communists have invaded the church, and the Freemasons will come after them, and they bring homosexuality into the priesthood, and they bring worldliness and all kinds of stuff. And this is the stuff that we're reaping these very bitter fruits, okay? So I want you to put Matthew 7:23, by their fruits you will know them. And Matthew 10:26. So November the 12th, 1910, there are many ways to God. And the extraordinary thing is that while we're all trying to live the divine will, the way each one of us will express it will be very different to everybody else. And so God has an enormous variety that he works. Luisa said, I was thinking about Blessed Jesus when he was carrying the cross to Calvary, especially when he met with Veronica. Now that lady's name was Nike, Nike. It's only in later tradition that she became known as Veronica. Nike was a woman in her 60s whose daughter was the first person to ever dedicate her virginity to Christ. Who offered him a piece of cloth so that he might dry his face, all dripping with blood. And I said to my beloved Jesus, my love, Jesus, heart of my heart, if Veronica offered you a cloth, I don't want to offer you little cloths to dry your blood, but I want to offer you my heart, my continuous heartbeat, all my love, my little intelligence, my breath, the circulation of my blood, my movements. Now notice, total union. Just put total union beside that. I give everything. Okay? And therefore she's fulfilling Deuteronomy 6:4-10. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and being. And she said, and not only from your face, but from all of your most sacred humanity. I intend to tear myself into so many little pieces for as many as are your wounds, your sorrows, your bitterness, the drops of the blood you shed, so as to place on all of your sufferings, on some my love, on some a relief, on some a kiss, on some reparation, on some an act of compassion, and on others thanksgiving, and so on. So, I don't want any little particle of my being, any drop of my blood to be left without occupying itself with you. And do you know what I want as recompense, she said? That in all of the tiniest particles of my being, you impress the seal of your image, another Christ. So just put another Christ there. Alter Christus, another Christ. So that in finding you in everything and everywhere, I may multiply my love. Love will keep growing eternally because God is love. So, having received Holy Communion and looking into myself, I could see in each particle of my being the whole of Jesus within a flame. You see, love is fire. Okay? Love is fire. So she sees all the little flames all over her own being. And this flame spoke of love. And Jesus said to me, here is my daughter made content. As many are the ways in which she has given herself to me, so many and tripled. Why does he triple everything? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Everything has to be Trinitarian. Okay? and tripled are the ways in which I give myself to her. So, in other words, you are responded to by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We're inclined to think that God gives you one response. He says, no, there are three persons. You get it triple. Isn't it fantastic? So November the 23rd, 1910, it's still talking about love. Love is enough for everything. And it changes natural virtues into divine. Okay? So finding myself in my usual state, I was thinking about purity. Now, it's usually purity of intention. Purity means not mixed with anything else. And about how I do not give a thought to this beautiful virtue either for or against. It seems to me that on this button of purity, it neither bothers me nor do I think about it. So she is very unlike the vast majority of the human race who have got to struggle with their sexuality and their emotions. So I said to myself, I myself do not know how I am with regard to this virtue. And I don't want to meddle in this. Love is enough for me in everything. That's very wise. Don't create problems. Don't fix something if it isn't broken. And Jesus, adding to my words, said, my daughter, love encloses everything. Love chains everything. Love gives life to everything. Love triumphs over everything. Love embellishes everything, and love enriches everything. Now, I kept repeating love to get the emphasis. Isn't that fantastic? So, Ephesians 3, 14 to 21. You have to be grounded on love and built on love, and you reach the full maturity of love. Okay. Purity is content with not doing any gaze, act, gaze, thought or word which is not honest, while it tolerates the rest. And this amounts to the acquisition of mere natural purity. Love is jealous of everything, even of one's thought and breath. So one's thought is 2 Corinthians 10:5. A lot of our problems originate in thoughts. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says that every thought must be captured and given to Christ. Okay. So love is jealous of everything, even of one's thought and breath. As honest as one may be, it wants everything for itself. And with this, it gives to the soul not natural, but divine purity. Now, beside that, I want you to put Matthew 5:8. Matthew 5:8, the pure in heart see God. Okay. And so with all the other virtues. Now, in our generation, it is extremely difficult to have this virtue of purity either on a natural or a supernatural level if you are wallowing in the entertainment that they give you on the internet or on the television, because it's a mixture of violence and sex, which is hell, it's not heaven. So it's very difficult not to be affected by it and not to be smeared by it. It's very difficult not to be pulled down in some way by it. And you'll know if you've been affected by it, because when you come to talk about the purest and the holiest of things, it has taken away the edge. And it will even take away the desire, it will take away the urge to go towards holiness. So the more we become committed to the divine will, the less we have to turn the television on. And I know some people who have turned it off permanently as well. So we just have to be careful of the influence, because the problem with the television is that it's going directly into your eyes, and the eyes are the windows of the soul. And because it's given to you in visual form, it leaves an impression on the brain that can come back at any time, in your sleep or wakefulness. So we just have to be very careful. One can say that love is patience, love is obedience, love is sweetness, love is fortitude, love is peace. It's everything. That's 1 Corinthians 13, 1-13. Love is patient and kind. It's not rude, it's not jealous, and all the rest of it. You remember it? Mm-hmm. So that's 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 to 13. If all the other virtues do not receive life from love, they can be called natural virtues at the most. Now, this is actually quite important because you can meet people who have no faith and we would call them decent. Because they're living upright lives as far as nature is concerned, okay? But their virtues are not supernatural. Is that okay? And it's important for us to see the difference. Now, if a person has no knowledge of God whatsoever and they operate righteously according to their nature, God will be very, very, very merciful to them. Okay. But love changes them into divine virtues. Now that's the end. That's 1 Corinthians 13:13. It's the end of the one I've just given to you. The greatest of these is love. Because the love we're talking about is divine love poured into us. And one of the easy ways to grow in holiness is to keep saying to the Lord, increase your love in me. Increase your love in me. It's actually very simple. Increase your love in me, because the more he increases his love, the more we are stimulated to respond in love. Is that okay? Because you might get the impression that this is all very complicated. In actual fact, it's very simple, because God is love. And so Luisa is showing us, I'm going to get all the groups to study love at one point, but we'll do it together. There's an enormous amount of teaching about love in all of these volumes. And Jesus is saying God is love. And if everything is concentrated on love, then everything is solved. So instead of me having to try and grow in patience and grit my teeth and try and put up with everybody around me, if I actually love the people around me, the patience will come. The long-suffering will come. I mean, why do parents put up with all that the children and babies do? Because they love them. That's true. Why do they put up with each other, the spouses? Because they love one another. Do you know what I mean? And it's the love that actually binds the family together. If the love isn't there, the whole thing falls apart, as you know. And so he's telling us here that the spiritual life is exactly the same. If you concentrate on the love, everything else comes together. So, if all the other virtues do not receive life from love, in other words, if love isn't the centre, if love isn't the thing that's holding them all together, they can be called natural virtues. But love changes them into divine virtues. Oh, what a difference between the two. The natural virtues are servants, and the divine virtues, you need to add the word virtues, are queens. The divine virtues are queens. That allows you to conquer yourself and conquer all kinds of things. Therefore, may love be enough for you in everything. That's wonderful. So that's 1 John 4. 1 John 4, 7 to 17. Now, since we've been talking about love, we come to another message about love. Do you see the point I'm making? You get a whole group of messages that are all connected. Okay. So this is November the 28th, 1910. My book says 1920. It's 1910. That's just a scribal error. And it says, lack of love has cast the world into a net of vices. When love disappears, society just doesn't work. When there isn't some kind of friendship between world leaders, we have war. So Luisa said, finding myself in my usual state, I saw my always lovable Jesus. In my interior, I felt myself all transformed in the love of Jesus. I found myself inside of Jesus, bursting into acts of love together with him, loving as Jesus loved. Now that's exactly what he wants. But I'm unable to say it, she said. I lacked the words. I would find my sweet Jesus in me, and I alone would burst into acts of love, while Jesus would listen to me, telling me, say it again, repeat it again. Exactly like a child. Say it again, isn't that right? You know the way a child can say over and over again, say it again. Relieve me with your love, he said. Lack of love has cast the world into a net of vices. And he would remain silent in order to listen to me. So now we're going to get Luisa isn't the type for writing poetry, but she makes an effort here. And she said, I'll try and remember what I said. In every moment, in every hour, I want to love you with all my heart. Now notice she's making the intention. She's telling him, this is what I want. So you and I can place the intention of this. So in every moment, in every hour, in every breath of my life, while breathing, I will love you. In every beat of my heart, love, love, I will repeat. In every drop of my blood, love, love, I will cry out. In every movement of my body, love alone I will embrace. Of love alone I want to speak, of love alone I want to look, to love alone I want to listen, always of love I want to think. With love alone I want to burn, with love alone I want to be consumed. Only love I want to enjoy, only love I want to content. From love alone I want to live, and within love I want to die. In every instant, in every hour, I want to call everyone to love. All of this is covered with I intend. Okay, I place the intention. Only and always together with Jesus and in Jesus I shall live. Into his heart I shall plunge myself, and together with Jesus and with his heart, love, love, I will love you. Now, Luisa isn't the artistic type that goes into raptures of poetry. But John of the Cross became the most famous poet in Spain because of his raptures of love to God. And he has an incredible book called The Living Flame of Love. It's absolutely fantastic. And John wrote poetry that they're still trying to analyse today. And they can't really analyse it because they're not at his level. Do you know what I mean? Saint Therese of Lisieux is also one, but she was very artistic, who burst into poetry very frequently and burst into song as a result of this. So Luisa said, who can say everything? So let's go on into November 29, 1910, and this time we're talking about jealous love. Well, all true love is jealous. It wants the beloved for themselves, isn't that correct? Mm-hmm. Because love wants unity. Since a good and holy priest was coming, I was a little bit anxious to speak with him, Luisa said, especially about my current state and to know the will of God. Now, I find it fascinating that she's getting so much help from heaven. At least that's what it appears to me in the books anyway. That when a visiting priest comes along, she wants to talk to him about the will of God and about what her state is and everything. It just shows you that no matter how gifted a person is, we're still all very vulnerable.
Reassurance.
Yeah. And now after he came the first and the second time, I saw that nothing would be done of what I wanted. In other words, the priest had his own agenda. Okay. So having received Holy Communion, all afflicted, I was repeating my great affliction to my affectionate Jesus, saying to him, my life, my good, and my all, it shows that you alone are everything for me. I have never found in any creature, as good and holy as they may be, a word, a comfort, a solution for the slightest doubt of mine. It shows how there is to be no one for me but you alone. Okay? That's Deuteronomy 32:12. Deuteronomy 32:12. The Lord alone was her guide. Deuteronomy 32:12. So you alone, the all for me, and I alone, always alone for you. Now notice she's underlining the alone. She has repeated it many times, which means that she feels very isolated. Okay. Now, you feel isolated when nobody around you understands you. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. And so I abandon myself to you completely and always. As bad as I am, she said, have the goodness of holding me in your arms without leaving me for a single instant. Now, Jesus is going to explain to her why nobody is able to help her. While I was saying this, my blessed Jesus made himself seen, looking in my interior, turning everything upside down to see if there was something which he didn't like. In other words, if she gave any affection to anybody else. And while turning and turning, he took something like a grain of white sand in his hands and he threw it on the ground. And then he said to me, dearest daughter of mine, it is absolutely right that for one who is all for me, I should, you need to add the word should, be all for her. That's to make the English correct. I should be all for her. I am too jealous that someone else might give her the slightest comfort. Now, I forgot to look up jealous for you. There's loads of references in the book of Deuteronomy to the Lord being jealous. That means that he doesn't want any other gods in taking up our affections and our love. He wants to be the only one. Okay. I am a jealous God, he says. So he said, I am too jealous that someone else might give her even the slightest comfort. I myself alone want to make up for all and in everything. In other words, he wants to be all in all for the person. Okay. What is it that afflicts you? What do you want? I will do everything to make you content. Notice you need to add, I will. Do you see that white grain that I removed from you? It's nothing but a little bit of anxiety for you to know my will from other people. You see, and that little anxiety turned up every now and then. I removed it and I threw it on the ground so as to leave you in holy indifference. Holy indifference is complete freedom. That I'm at peace whether you think I'm right or wrong, or whether I think I'm right or wrong, or anybody else thinks I'm right or wrong. I'm still trusting in God completely. That's called holy indifference. That's the way I want you, he said. And now I will tell you what my will is. I want Mass and also communion. As for whether or not you must wait for the priest to come round, you will be indifferent about this. In other words, allow yourself to be exercised on the point. If you feel dozy, you will not try to come round. If you feel awake, you will not try to doze. However, know that I want you always ready, always at your post of victim soul. You need to add the word soul. Even if you don't always suffer. So that's Luke 12, 35 to 40. Luke 12, 35 to 40. That's the servant must be always ready for the master's return. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. I want you like the soldiers in the battlefield. Even if the act of fighting is not continuous, they remain with their weapons ready, and if necessary, seated in the quarters, so that every time the enemy tries to start the fight, they may always be ready to defeat him. You see, that's the message of Luke 12:35, always ready for the master's return. The same for you, my daughter. You will remain always ready. Now, you call that ever ready batteries? Okay, ever ready. Always at your post, so that every time I should want to make you suffer, either for my relief or to hold back chastisement or for anything else, I may find you always ready. I do not have to always call you. I don't have to always dispose you to the sacrifice every time. Or rather, you will consider yourself as being always called. You've been called and that's it. Even if I should not always keep you in the act of suffering. So we've understood each other, haven't we? He said, be tranquil and fear nothing. In other words, no retirement, permanent duty. Is that okay? December the 2nd, 1910 is beautiful, 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 beautiful. It's about love. It's about the power of nothingness. And it's about us being a spark of God's love. It's fantastic. This is a lovely message. Continue in my usual state, my always lovable Jesus came, and I saw myself as a spark. A spark comes from fire. This spark was going around my dear Jesus, and it would land on his head. She has the word stop, and I put land, because we would say that it would land on your head. Or in his eyes, or even in his mouth, or even descend inside of him deep in his innermost adorable heart. And then it would come out and go around. And Jesus would even place it under his feet. And instead of being extinguished at the warmth of his divine feet, it would ignite even more. You need to write the word even more. It would come out with greater speed from underneath his feet and would turn around Jesus again. And it also prayed with Jesus. It loved him and it repaired him. In sum, it did whatever Jesus was doing. And with Jesus, this spark became immense. It embraced everything in the prayer. No one escaped it. It was present in the love of all, and for all it loved, it repaired, it made up for everyone and everything. That's your Philippians 4:13. I can do all things in Christ who gives me the strength. Now, you also have, the spark is nothing, isn't it? But Jesus is the fire. God is the fire. And when we are all for him, we've just been told in the last message that she's to be ever ready for him, isn't that right? Mm-hmm. So here's the spark ever ready to be at his service. And with Jesus, the spark becomes immense. It's nothing of itself. So it's the difference between a spark and a huge fire. Isn't that fantastic? It embraced everything. It can only do that in the divine will, in prayer, and no one escaped it. It was present in the love of all. You can only be present to all in the divine will. And for all, it loved and it repaired. This is what we're asked to do, but you can only do it through him, with him, and in him. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. It made up for everyone and for everything. Oh, how admirable and unutterable is that which is done with Jesus. I lack the words to be able to put on paper the expressions of love and other things that can be done with Jesus. Obedience would want it so, but the mind goes up high to take the words from Jesus, and then it descends down below. Up high, of course, is in the spiritual realm, and down below is back on earth. So up high is in her out-of-the-body experience, and down below is sitting in the bed. And down below it tries to find the expressions, the words of the natural language, and it can't do it. Okay, so I want to give you 1 Corinthians 2:9 there. And a little heading for the next paragraph. Luisa herself is the spark. Then my beloved Jesus told me, my daughter, you are the spark of Jesus. A spark can be anywhere. It can penetrate into anything, but it occupies no space. Therefore you have your nothingness as well. At most it lives up high. That's the eagle, living high up. And it wanders around. And it's also delightful. That's your Song of Songs 7:7. You are altogether delightful. And Luisa said, Jesus, a spark is very weak and can easily be extinguished. And if it goes out, there's no way to give it new life. Therefore, poor me, I arrive at being extinguished. I just love it. He has just told her she can reach anywhere, do anything. It's incredible. Yeah. Jesus said, no, the spark of Jesus can't be extinguished. That's the difference. You're not just a spark. You're a spark of Jesus, because God is the fire. Okay? A spark of Jesus cannot be extinguished because its life is nourished by the fire of Jesus. And the sparks which have life from my fire are not subject to death. And if they die within the very fire of Jesus. I have made you the spark so that I may enjoy myself more with you And because of the littleness of the spark, I can use it in making it go around continuously inside and outside of myself, keeping it in whatever part of me I want. Whatever part of me I want is whatever part of the church. Okay? In my eyes, in my ears, in my mouth, under my feet. Now, she gets it as very graphical, physical language, but it's in actual fact any part of the church. So one time she's taken to see people struggling, another time she's seeing the leaders of the church, another time she's seeing this, that and the other. So December the 22nd, the heading I have for this is Make Room for God. Make room for God. Continuing my usual state, I saw various priests, Luisa said, before my mind. And blessed Jesus said, in order to be able to operate great things for God, it is necessary to destroy self-esteem, human respect, and one's own nature. One's own nature is one's own will. Now that's all volume 1 and 2. Okay. So as to live again from the divine life. Okay? So I want to give you John 8:44 to get rid of the human respect. And take into consideration only the esteem of the Lord and that which regards his honour and his glory. It's necessary to crush, to pulverize that which is human. Now, you're talking there about the ego, the self, the bit that wants to kill love. Okay? It's necessary to crush, to pulverize that which is human in order to be able to live. The book says of God, I say from God or out of God. And here is how, not you, but God himself will speak and operate in you. Did you ever mark that? God himself will speak and operate in you. I think that's brilliant, isn't it? Mm. And the souls and the works entrusted to you will produce splendid effects. Okay? So you have to use Matthew 7:23. By their fruits you will know them. And Galatians 5:20, the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and so on. Okay? It will produce splendid effects. And it's by these effects that you'll know who they are. And you will receive the fruits which you and I longed for. Okay. And he gives an example of the works of the reunion of priests, which they spoke about quite a lot in volumes 1 to 4. Okay. There were huge problems in the clergy in Italy at the time. Families were pushing their sons into the priesthood because it was a good way of life. And then they were making the sons in charge, the sons who are now priests, putting them in charge of the family businesses. So they were pulling the priest away from his priesthood and destroying him and the church. So Jesus said we had to get the priests away from the families and into reunions of priests. And what he meant was houses where they would live together in community and go out and work in the parishes from these communities. That's what they were talking about. One of these might be able to promote and also carry out this work, but a little bit of self-esteem, a useless fear of human respect renders him incapable. The smallest thing can put a person off. And when grace finds the soul surrounded by this baseness, it flies and doesn't stop, and the priest remains a man and operates as a man. How should he be operating? As a... Yeah.
Christ.
As another Christ. In other words, a man in Christ. So instead of the human level, he should be operating at the divine level. So just at the divine level. So you can see that the tragedy has him working at a level that's absolutely useless. And his works have the effects of those of a man. That means down at the natural level. Not the effects of a priest, which should be up at the divine level, animated by the Spirit that Jesus Christ would have. This terrible tragedy that he's gone to the trouble of training for priesthood, and is operating completely at the wrong level. Now, unfortunately, that's still there. Okay. Do you want to do one more and we'll stop then? So, the reason I want to do one more is that it'll finish this type of reasoning. And I have a VIP on this one. Irresolute souls are good at nothing. That's December the 24th, 1910. Having received communion, Luisa said, I was praying, good Jesus, for a priest who wanted to know whether the Lord was calling him to the religious state. I love this. And good Jesus said to me, my daughter, I call him, but he's always undecided. The souls which are not resolute are good at nothing. While on the other hand, when the ones are determined and resolute, they surpass all difficulties. He melts them. And the very ones who raise the difficulties in seeing him so resolute become debilitated and don't have the courage to oppose him. It's a little bit of human attachment that binds him. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Do you remember my story about the bird on the tree? It's a story from John of the Cross, that if a bird is tied to a tree and can't fly, does it matter whether it's tied by a rope or a thread? It doesn't on the one hand because it's a slave, but it's much more tragic if it's tied by a thread. And what Jesus said is that this man is tied by a thread, a little attachment, a little human attachment. And you see, that's the problem. Very often it's something small. It's not actually something monumental. And he said, I do not want to contaminate my grace. Look at that. In hearts that are not untied from everyone. Now, the human attachment will be his attachment to his family, because that's the problem that was in Italy at the time. Let him detach himself from everything. Now, that's the teaching in volumes 1 to 4. Let him detach himself from everything and everyone, and then my grace will inundate him more, and he will feel the necessary strength to fulfill my call. So we leave it there for tonight. Is that okay?